All right, sounds good. So let's get things going here. So I have a phenomenal panel of experts who were instrumental in building a robust automation program at their respective companies. However, the respective programs continue to evolve as new technologies become available. So I have with us today Marilyn Krichko. She's an automation leader at Spectrum Brands. Laura Hendricks. She's the Senior VP of Robotic Process Automation and Process Improvement at First Horizon Bank. Lori Pung. She's a director at the Claim Strategy and Transformation at AAA's Auto Club Group. Jay Galati. He's the Global Head of Application Services and Intelligent Automation at Regeron. So each of them have a wealth of information leading a center of excellence to drive automation across the organization. So I guarantee you're going to gain some valuable insights from this discussion. But I think it's important to baseline what a center of excellence is. So, from our client feedback, it can be referred to as a dedicated group that designs, develops, and supports intelligent automation solutions across the organization. A COE guides the business in the adoption of automation technology. They provide strategy, governance, resources. They do the intake of automation, of use cases. They manage the vendors. They handle security, compliance, training, and on top of that, they help manage change. So it's a huge responsibility. And then at the same time, it needs to be agile. So just in order to be able to keep up with the changing business needs. So at a macro level, that's what a center of excellence is. So to get things kicked off, I'd like to share some results of a survey we conducted at Zinnov. We surveyed 257 CXOs who are implementing automation across their enterprise. 40% of those surveyed have set up automation-specific COEs. 35% of them intend to build one, and 25% are not leveraging a COE construct for automation just yet. So, Marilyn, let's start with you. Why was it so important for Spectrum Brands to create their automation COE to drive automation?
Well, first of all, automation started at Spectrum Brands as part of our transformation effort, right? We are a Fortune 500 company. We have a global presence. And we thought that establishing a framework for governance was really important. We aren't just automating mundane tasks. We're also using automation for continuous improvement. We were not going to use a waterfall method. So I brought a process in place, which is called Ready, Dev, Go. Some of you who know me know that this is really my passion because it's related to rowing, right? So in rowing, when you start a rowing race, they yell a command called Ready, All, Row. And I was walking around the block one night and I was thinking, this is all new to Spectrum Brands, right? Automation's new, transformation, is happening right now. So there's a lot of change going on. And now I'm putting an agile process in place. So I need a basic process that we can roll out across the company that everyone understands. So I took Ready, All, Row in that command to get a race, started. And I started a process called Ready, Dev, Go, which you can all understand, right? You get everything ready up front and everyone understands their part in that. The devs do their work and then you take it live, you go live. And I thought at the time that we were setting this up, this is a lot of different information for everyone. So we have to set up a center of excellence. That way we can align strategies, we could put a good process in place, and we could all move forward together in a consistent way.
Oh, that's awesome. That is such great insights. So let's go to you, Laura. Anything you'd like to add from First Horizon's perspective?
It was critical for us to form a center of excellence. We started our initiative in back office operations. And so we center of there, and it was not a centralized center of excellence. It was just for the back office operations. But with us starting it there in the back office operations, with us being so highly regulated, we had stakeholders, of course, that were extremely resistant to this idea of bots running around the bank. As people tend to think they might go crazy on their own. But we involved the stakeholders before we ever selected our software or anything. We involved all the stakeholders with audit, compliance, regulatory, risk management, IT security, ID management. We spent 3 months just reviewing what were going to be our policies and procedures and helping establish those. And we went very slowly at first to get those guardrails in place. And we established a great amount of credibility by doing that and having the Center of Excellence. A lot of trust was created because they knew we had our policies and procedures in place. And so they didn't have to worry about us and our bots, running around just willy-nilly without any guidance or structure.
No, that's awesome. In terms of getting compliance and your security involved, right before you start to get technology, that's awesome. Very good.
It was critical for us. They're still very involved, by the way. I meet with them monthly, all my stakeholders monthly, and we continue to improve.
Absolutely. Okay, so now that we've got some insights on why the company needs a COE, let's talk about the value proposition, and getting that business stakeholder buy-in. So my next question is for you, Lori. How did you create a sense of urgency for the business units and stakeholders to embrace automation?
Well, I think showing the value, what could the bot do to process high volume, in many instances, transactions that were fairly low risk. So we started off with, to Laura's point, with back office processes. And I think when we could demonstrate the operational efficiency, the speed, the impact on customer experience, the impact on our user experience, we were able to leverage our staff to do activities that were more challenging, that had a bigger impact on our customer experience and on our Net Promoter Score, which is one of the key KPIs that we measure. And I think when we saw that the tech could take care of some of the transactional pieces and allow our staff to focus on that human experience. So our staff, we were able to deploy our staff in a much more impactful way from the standpoint of engaging in experiences that really focused on the human experience of our customer, where engagement, empathy, rapport were really key. I work in property and casualty claims. There are claims where we have fatalities, so very serious injuries. Someone could lose their home, as an example. So I think once we got the first few projects identified and operational, then it was a matter of everyone was knocking on the door. So how do you prioritize all of these initiatives? Because everyone wants the bot to do something that could free their resources to do something more impactful. So we partner very closely with IT to evaluate all our projects. We have a steering committee where we look and score projects out. So really, once we got the first few projects up and running, we were able to free up resources to do higher impact activities. It really sold itself.
That's awesome. Yeah, in terms of just kind of guiding the business through that customer journey is a really, really key component to that, showing that value. Now, that's great. So next question or next topic here, automation technology, it's shifted from being more of a targeted solution addressing very specific problems to more of a holistic approach, involving the entire business process. So before, RPA was the focus, and that's what the Center of Excellence was built around. So now, we're seeing from our clients, and we see it in the marketplace here, obviously, that now it's RPA plus low code and no code solutions, intelligent document processing, chat bots, those are just a few technologies that are coming out. So with the automation toolbox expanding beyond RPA, where should the COE ideally be situated in an organization? Is it within IT, shared services, operations, or even within its own business unit? So Jay, what are your thoughts on the COE placement within the organization?
Well, thanks for that. I think I'm going to give you the classic example. It depends, and the reason I say that is right. So if you look at some of the stories that we just heard from Marilyn, from Lori, Laura, it really starts up with there's a business problem. What is that business problem, and how do we come to that solution? So the first and foremost is understanding what kind of automation is needed. But before we even get to the automation, what is a problem that we're trying to solve? So I think once you understand the problem statement, then you can come back and say, okay, is it a business process problem or is it a technology problem? And then based on that business process problem, once you've got a good process, well, how can you now automate that process? A lot of times we are too quick to go to automation, whereas maybe it's a broken process. So how do we fix that process? And then looking at whether if it's a BPA or a decision-making automation or a low-code automation. But the question around where does this sit? I think it's a partnership. For us, within our organization, it started out truly as, hey, let's incubate this within the engineering space. And once it was incubated, it went into its own sort of organization that was delivering the service. And then, starting to go into a maturity curve, I would say we're going to be going year 4 in this maturity curve. For the last 18 months, it has been within the remit of an enterprise services model where we're truly delivering it as a service to all the business stakeholders. So we would partner with someone like Lori, who truly understands the business, to looking at, hey, what are we looking to solve as a true business partner? Then we deliver those services, automation services, irrespective if it's RPA, BPA, you could put all the buzzwords in the world you want to put around it. Let's figure out how do we solve for it and how do we continue to evolve it. So the idea is that, how do we constantly evolve it and partnering with your business? I think that's sort of the best model for us. It's working great, but I'm sure, Marilyn has other thoughts as well.
Sure. Yes, Marilyn, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that that's really great insight. We have a little different model. So ours is centralized. It's an IT function, but we partner with business consultants who go out to the business and they find the right opportunities for us. So we know before something even comes to us for governance, we know that it's ripe for some sort of automation, right? We use 3 different automation technologies at our company. And so they bring those to us. What we like about keeping it centralized is that if you look at how large we are as a company, sometimes the business thinks they need something they don't need, and that goes back to what you just said. What are we really trying to solve for at the end of the day? If we left it up to the business, though, to pick the technology, they're not as knowledgeable about technology as we are. So we partner really closely with our enterprise architecture team. So when a business problem comes to us, we meet with them to figure out what's the best way to solve for this technology-wise, so the business can focus on the business and we can focus on the technology. So same sort of thing at the back end, right? About what are we trying to solve, but then we take care of everything on the technology side. And we know it's ripe for automation when it comes to us.
No, very good, Marilyn. So you mentioned governance, so let's kind of dig into that one a little bit more. So this question is going to go to Laura, but first I want to kind of tee this up here a little bit. So there's a lot of different types of governance models. So Marilyn, what you just mentioned was a centralized COE. So basically that's set up to serve all the business units, and then a decentralized. That's where you would have a center of excellence that is dedicated to each individual business unit. And then you have a federated type of model where it's a combination of both, where you would have a COE at the top level and then providing that overall governance, but then at the individual business units, you would provide that, the capacity, you would get the intake of projects, you would do the development and the operations, and it's kind of pushed down to the business unit there. So there's pros and cons, around each of them, especially around scalability and knowledge sharing and so forth. So Laura, what kind of advice can you share to someone just getting started with setting up their COE governance model?
Be very flexible. We have transitioned pretty through the gambit. As I said, I started in back office operations, and so we were an independent COE. But as everyone in the bank started hearing about RPA and what the bots could do, they started coming to us to address the needs across the bank. We weren't set up to do bandwidth. So they established an enterprise center of excellence in our IT department. So we were a bit of a hybrid. Last July, we merged with Iberia Bank, and the decision was made then to have a centralized COE. And now I lead the centralized COE, which it works out beautifully. We're not in IT. We're not in the business. We're in the business transformation. And so we operate equally across all the bank, and that's our responsibility. So my advice would be to just be open-minded. Don't think that if you establish one thing, it has to be set in stone. Hopefully your business is transforming, and so should your COE, your policies and procedures, and how you address your whole program.
Oh, absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, with the COE and just with all the new technologies coming, you're constantly evolving, and that is great insights there, Laura. Thank you. So now let's shift a little bit more to the roles that makes up a center of excellence. So Marilyn, bring this over to you. Can you share the types of roles that make up your automation center of excellence? And
yeah, I'd be happy to.
Size of that team?
Yep, I'd be happy to. And Laura, that was really great insight. I love hear about banking because I started my career early on at the Federal Reserve Bank, and it's just so nice to hear your perspective.
It's been interesting. I came from FedEx, so it's been a new world for me.
Oh, okay. That's great. Yeah. So I think, it's going to be different for all of us. And I really enjoy being on this panel and hearing your perspective. So the ideal size to me depends on your vision for the future, right? Your strategy, the business problems you're trying to solve, the number of automations that you're trying to complete, and the complexity of them, right? Because that's going to change over time. But we have three major roles in our Center of Excellence. We have the business consultants who I spoke about, who bring the ideal automations to us. We have the governance committee, and then we have my automation team. And everything does start with that business consultant, right? Helping bring the right things forward. Our governance committee is made up of someone from operations, someone from analytics, enterprise architecture, and supply chain, because those are our key areas, right? And then, I'm also an architect myself, so an engineering architect. So I help with those solutions. I run the meetings and make recommendations upfront to the governance committee. Then as the leader of the automation team, my role is really to interact with C-level executives and senior leaders, run governance and manage the team, right? Work with resources and budgets and planning. My analyst also acts as a project manager. So I think that you need either an analyst or a project manager, and ideally someone who can do both. They gather requirements, they do process recordings. One thing that they do that I think is a really important role is they help build a table of access and assets that are needed, especially for RPA. If you're just talking about RPA, the way you set up your bots and assets is so important to being successful. They create PDDs, and then they run regular meetings with stakeholders. And then I have levels of developers. So if you look at my developer team, I think it's really important to have skill sets that run kind of the gamut from someone who is very experienced, right? So I have a developer too. That person works with me on our system to help keep it stable. They do code reviews. They work on the more complex automations like financial automations. They have great C# and .NET background. My developer one is my workhorse developer. They produce more automations than anyone else. They're also C#, .NET, Java. They have a heavy web side background, which is important to us because that connects with our business and business problems we're always trying to solve for, right? And then I have a developer one who's 1 year out of college, and they do our easier automations. And then I have an intern who's, in college today, and they're seeing new things all the time. All of these things to me make up our center of excellence. I know some people don't consider their development team, so much as part of that center of excellence. But what happens with us is they help me understand what we should be doing, what we can be doing, so our resource load doesn't get too heavy. The other piece of our center of excellence and kind of this team that makes up everything is vendors. And our relationship with our vendors is very important. And I know that's going to vary. We'll probably talk about that at some point, in our call today. But I think what's really important about that is that we don't forget about them because they've been valuable in giving us advice around our center of excellence. Is it a best practice model? Is it really working? And we get a lot of valuable information from them. Yep. So that's pretty much it. But it's these three major roles: the business consultants, our governance committee, and our automation team.
No, I love the idea of the broad range of perspectives because, in terms of your development team, I think it's great to have the interns to have that fresh view, 1 or 2 years of experience, and then others that have maybe that 4 or 5+ years. To provide some leadership, but still looking at all these different problems with a different type of a lens, just gives you a really nice holistic view of your program. So that's great. Okay, so the next thing is, just around measuring success. This is a hot topic from our clients. We hear it all the time. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with this metrics. In terms of, just tracking and measuring the success of automation projects. So, Lori, I'd like to direct this question to you. What metrics and outcomes are you tracking at AAA? Because I'm sure you have a ton of them that you're trying to measure.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I'm really identifying with some of the advice and counsel that Jay, Laura, and Marilyn have provided throughout the course of our discussion, because I think it starts with identifying a process that's suitable for automation. And down the pathway of automation, there have been a lot of failed projects and projects where we automate something that is not yet optimized. And then the second part of that is making sure that we evolve it. There's this expression that I have: it's easy to plop and drop, not go back, take a look. Was that initiative successful? Because a lot of times the lens is, let's go and automate the next cool, sexy thing. So one of the things that we do is we produce dashboarding, and we measure things like operational efficiency. We measure exception processing. So we also measure, did the bot operate as we expected? How many times did we have to intercede? So there's SLA measurements about, is the bot operating as we expected? And how often do we have to go in? Is the bot sized for unusual events? We had a recent event in June where we had a catastrophic claim event. We had a large flooding event, and we leveraged the bot for customer-facing activities like creating your inspection assignment for our property claims. And the bot could not keep up with the CAT volumes. So there are always lessons learned. So we go back in and we retool. And, part of our discipline is also looking at what post-production, did we reach our expected return on investment? Were there the real FTE savings, or do we have monitoring and other activities to oversee the bot where we really didn't get the win? And then secondarily, how do we evolve it? How do we tweak it? So we look at those SLAs. We look at things like what is our claim cycle time? What is our NPS impact? What's our speed to payment? Because our bot handles a lot of our back office financial transactions. So are we getting that throughput? And did we really leverage in the business case what we thought we could leverage? Are we really realizing true automation in those processes? And it is a discipline to hold yourself accountable. So we go back and we look at those operational dashboards, and we're consistently tweaking and putting new change orders and things that we could do to make it more effective. So that's how we approach it at ACG.
Oh, that's great. I really like the example there where you have some unexpected spikes in volume, how that impacts the bot. So that's where I think it was Jay that was talking about just those partnerships within the organization, like around infrastructure. So when you do have those kinds of situations, you have that partnership ready to go and be able to talk to someone from infrastructure and increase that capacity to be able to handle that. So great example. Next thing, so, there's always roadblocks, when it comes to automation. So, again, referencing the CXO survey that Zinnov did, and we learned that enterprises scale their automation program. 64% face organizational challenges, 59% face process-related challenges, and over 40% have technology-related issues. So this question goes to Jay. Jay, how did you handle any opposition towards automation, and how did you overcome that?
I love your stats because I feel like, depending on when those stats were issued, every year those numbers change based on the types of automation. When we first went in, a lot of challenges. It took us, I want to say 6 to 9 months just to get that first spot, out the door, quote unquote. Business challenges where people are afraid of job loss, people are afraid of, hey, what does it mean for me? So, as we are progressing and as we are, I'll call it maturing in that curve, I think you got to have a roadmap. You really got to look at, okay, what is it that you're going to establish this year? What are you going to establish next year? One of the advices that, I have received in many years from multiple mentors is, don't try to bite more than what you can chew on. So I think the same thing with automation. We took a strategic approach to say, okay, we're going to be focusing on RPA this year, whereas, we had many businesses and business partners saying, hey, we want other elements of automation, but, we want to get this right. We want to load balance this correctly. We want to make sure that, there's appetite to make sure we can scale this, because the minute you go on that journey of automation, it's sort of, like Henry Ford said, you build it, they will come, right? So in this scenario, we started with that one bot, and then, I would say in 2019, we were on the double digits. And then, our goal is now going to the triple digits on a production basis, right? So that is a significant amount of bots in production doing, I'll call it double digit thousands of hours in savings. We're probably crossing 50,000 hours this year alone. But it really comes back to having that roadmap, making sure you're having conversations with the stakeholders. And your stakeholders is not your senior leaders. Your stakeholders are the employees, are the folks doing the task work, are the folks who are, part of the day-to-day, because you want to make sure that you would bring value to them. What is the value of you taking that manual task, right? That's where it really starts initially, from the task element of it, and automating it. What does it mean for them? How does it help them? So it's really looking at making sure we're looking at the human side of this. In the team, if you've got the right folks in the team, you can execute on that. If you're able to focus on the people side of the equation and the change management side of the equation, you can really, move forward that hyper automation of whether if it's chatbots or whether if it's business process automation or whether if it's, RPA, the conversation at the moment. I think you're much further along in that journey.
No, that's great. I mean, that's awesome advice, and, it's huge adoption. I mean, just kind of having that foresight to really think about your strategy, focus on the RPA, because it's very easy to get all these opinions that I want intelligent document processing, I want a chat bot, I want artificial intelligence and machine learning. And, like you said, you throw out all those buzzwords and it's very easy to kind of lose focus of the problems that you're actually trying to solve.
And just to add on to what Lori was saying, right? I mean, as you're going to have, some people call it challenges. I call it an opportunity, right? So if something is not happening, how do we take that opportunity, learn from that opportunity, put it into your playbook and your toolkit? So next time when you are doing that PDD, as Marilyn mentioned, hey, this happened last time. So it's really continuously building that toolkit. And also leveraging that for your other automations, because chances are you're going to have the same challenges over there as well. And, obviously having the partnerships across the organization, so, you're able to work together.
That's great. And also, too, I like your comment about involving the employee, who's directly impacted by the automation, because that experience is very important, because that employee will then be your advocate for the program. So if they have a bad experience in some way, that's going to impact your program. So keeping that focus on them just allows them to be an advocate for you. So I love that. So the next question here, I'd like to direct this towards you, Laura. We hear from our clients all the time that process fragmentation is a huge challenge. Where different business units, and they might have the same type of process, but perform it in a little bit of a different way. So, Laura, how did you deal with process fragmentation while trying to scale the automation program?
We have a really interesting structure. When I was brought on board to First Horizon, I was tasked with standing up the RPA Center of Excellence, but I was also tasked with standing a lean process improvement program. And so both those programs, which works out very well because we don't get bogged down on the RPA side when we run into these challenges of process fragmentation or broken processes, et cetera. But we see that the fragmentation not only across different departments, but also internally. If you've got in some departments, if they were doing things manually, they could have 10 doing it 10 different ways, little nuances, the same outcome, hopefully, but different nuances. And so the way that we addressed it initially, and we still do, is to get everyone together. We form a quality team, which goes onto our process improvement side, and we take a look at the process and come to a consensus collaboratively with them, which is critical, and to a consensus of what is the best standard way to do it. We can't improve things unless they're standardized. It's going different directions in different ways. And so the first thing is to come to that consensus of standardization. I think one of the other things, Jeff, that you were going to ask is on that, do you make everybody, across the enterprise, do you make everybody do everything the same way? For us, there are nuances across the enterprise that in many cases we cannot make them do it the same way. You can have a base core standard process, but then you have to have variations across the enterprise in order to afford for them to have their nuances and their differences. Having the two different programs running, simultaneously with each other, there's a lot of synergy. It's really a match made in heaven. But you learn from the RPA, you are able to see when you're working with the different process owners, you're able to see that the process really is not as efficient from the front end to the back end as it needs to be. And we are automating the back end, or we are automating the front end, and they really need the lift. So what we do a lot of times is we go ahead and give them the immediate lift of automating process, the back end or the front end process, and then we put it over into our quality, our process improvement program to handle it back end, front end to back end. Those bigger, larger scale process improvements to take away those silos and that fragmentation, I call them sticky. Yeah, they're not your. Somebody else mentioned sexy. They're not your sexy projects. You get a lot of resistance, and you get a lot of different, little tentacles that start coming out, and that's why they've stayed like they are for so long. But they have to be addressed. So those can take quite some time to get through, but they're actual. They're imperative for us to be able to function and compete and do the best jobs we can. But that's how we handle it.
Oh, that's awesome. No, and I like, just the fact that it is a dialogue, and, some people that do own a business process, they kind of keep that close to them. It's what they're comfortable with. Introducing automation in a broad sense can introduce risk. So you just really need to kind of keep that dialogue, take those small pieces, kind of like what you said, and just always be listening to your stakeholders and understand what their concerns are. So that's great, Laura. Lori, organizations large as AAA, I mean, you must have so many challenges around process fragmentation. Any advice you can share from your perspective?
Well, I agree with Laura. I think you have to involve your stakeholders. So at AAA, we grow organically and inorganically. So as an example, over the past 5 years, we have acquired the Carolina Motor Club. We have now our Colorado Motor Club that's joined the ACG family of companies. So we have subsidiaries, and we have a lot of different ways to do the same thing or very similar things. And we also have different systems. So one of the things that I like to ask is, help me understand what your process is. So we have our stakeholders, and if there is a turn in the road that's unique to a particular constituency, help me understand why it has to be this way, right? Is there really a case for the specials? Is it compliance? Is it regulatory? Because, just like Laura said, we're a insurance company, we're heavily regulated, and we have a bank. So we try to understand and lay out, if it's a similar process, do we need to take a turn in the road? And if so, we can code to that. And so we try to bring the stakeholders together and productively discuss and put things out on the table. And a lot of times the business stakeholder will step back and say, well, I guess it doesn't have to be this way, although we've done it this way for years. And so when we can demonstrate that we can get the same result and have a consistent process, but interestingly, Jeff, we consistently have conversations, whether it be RPA or just normal processes, of how can we coordinate and be more standard. We have 1,300 claim employees across our team. And so we have this hashtag of Claims Nation. So like on our intranet, we're constantly looking for how can we do things so that if there is an event, as an example, a catastrophic storm event, if we bring resources into another area, whether it be, technology, whether it be, catastrophic claim adjusting, and we're borrowing resources between the different companies, how can we build a better process so that we can all work together cohesively? So it's consistently a challenge. But I think bringing everyone to the table, identifying the true need for it to be different, helps us break down some of these, special handling processes that may or may not be beneficial. So that's kind of how we approach it.
No, that's great, Lori. And also, just to kind of comment on that, so it can be very tricky when you're dealing with business processes, because people on the business side, they know their business process very well, but they don't know what's possible around automation. So that's where your consultants, like what Marilyn uses and her center of excellence and your process specialist, they're the ones that can come in there and look at it with that automation lens and say, okay, we see this is your process. We understand your pain points. These are some potential automation solutions that can help with that. So,
Jeff, just to comment there, I agree with Marilyn. Our chief claim officers invested in a team. So I have an innovation team and they're claim technology consultants. So basically BAs that really speak technology and we speak big business. These are former adjusters, former managers that really understand the pain points of the business and understand the business use cases. And that does help us break down some barriers between our RPA COE, the business. We sit in the middle and we try to help paint what that to be could be. And I think that helps eliminate some friction as well.
No, that's awesome. That's great. Okay, so my last question around scaling. So Marilyn kind of touched upon this in terms of some external vendor partnerships. So, when it comes to a center of excellence, typically vendors are used to either set up a center of excellence. They can help with that intake of processes. And then they can also add some development to kind of help scale if you're getting more projects coming in than you can handle. So Marilyn, what's the role of external partners as part of your automation program?
Yeah, and I think we've run the gamut on that. So when we were first getting started, I set up our center of excellence, and then I reached out to some vendors to have them validate each piece of our Ready Dev Go model, right? To look at our governance up front, to look at how we're collecting everything that we need, how our developers are developing, right? This agile model, and then our whole go live model. So we use them, right up front to compare that and say, is this really turning into a best practice model? Because that's what I want to achieve with Ready Dev Go, right? Mm-hmm. They also help us with code review and error handling. So actually sitting in on our code reviews and making sure that we're looking at things the right way, because we have a lot of processes running today. We recently moved to the cloud. And when we moved to the cloud within the first week, we ran over 1,400 processes. That's a lot of stuff running, right? Yeah. And we're relatively new to this. We've only been running, I guess, a year and a half. And we have quite a lot of things in our system today. So we also use them as system experts. So looking at our system setup, especially with this move to the cloud, making sure our bots are being efficient. We use UiPath for our RPA technology, and they went from classic folders in the on-prem solution to modern folders in the cloud. So I don't know how many people, are doing that today, but it was confusing. I was looking at it, and I'm looking at it, with my chief developer, and we were having a hard time with it. We were like, how's this going to impact everything? Perfect time to call up our vendor partner, right? And say, could you help us look at this and help us set this up? So they're really valuable as things change, because when you stand up these systems, they change over time too, right? They make software updates just like we do in IT for other things. And sometimes they're big updates, sometimes they're little things, but we're busy with our day-to-day activities. So it can be really overwhelming. So we rely on them to be system experts. And then as we're trying to scale things, we use them for development activities, right? So recently, a really good example of this is recently the business came to us and they said, our number one priority is to automate these two processes. Because if we can automate these two processes, it's going to save us thousands and thousands of hours for our sales team. So people out in the field. Well, for a company like us, those people are really valuable. Their time's really valuable. And we had already baked our pipeline for the year, right? So we're full to the gills. And I actually think that our automation team right now is the ideal size. So I don't want to grow my internal team right now. I don't think it's the right time. I think we have everything pretty set, and I just want us to keep moving forward with what we have. So I'm relying on our vendor partner to provide developers for us to go ahead and supplement that. It's a perfect thing at this stage of where we are, because some people look at developers as pure developers, like they're just sitting there coding all day long. My developers don't work that way. They code all day long. They also help give advice to processes that we're automating. And they also have to make changes to the current load that's, all the current processes that are running today, right? Because change happens. And I want them to have enough time to actually manage that, right? So it's really important for this process that's happening right now. There's a time, a time lock on it when they want it to be complete. To me, that's the perfect time to go ahead and call a vendor, because they'll be able to dedicate 100% of their time to it when my own developers can't. So that's how we use them today. I'm sure people use them a lot of different ways, but that's the way we do it at Spectrum Brands.
Awesome. That's great, Marilyn. So unfortunately, we are out of time, but I would like to just quickly summarize everything we talked about. The Center of Excellence, it's continuously improving. You're bringing in new technologies, you're solving new business problems, you're scaling. It's evolving. And something that Marilyn mentioned was having a simple and understandable process to be able to work with the business. I think that's a really key takeaway here. Jay mentioned some information around, getting that stakeholder input before selecting technology. Jay and Laura made mention of that. I think that's really important to understand where you're at. This is more of a process type of challenge, not so much technology. There was also some input here around starting small, but those initiatives that have a big impact, I think that's really great advice, because if you take on something too big, it could take 6 months, 9 months to get that out the door, and it's hard to get that momentum. And understanding the business problem, work your way back from there. Just always focus on the business problem, not so much the technology at first. And the last thing you mentioned, Marilyn, was just around the vendor partnerships, just to help you scale, make sure you are having a center of excellence that is a best practice. You're getting the best value for that organization, and the impact of the rest of the enterprise. So thank you, everyone, for your time. Your input, your insights are quite instrumental, and I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you.
Welcome. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really being fun, and getting to work with some other people in the field. This is great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. I loved hearing all of your input. It's just so valuable. So thank you.
Yeah.
I agree, Marilyn. Jay, Lori, thank you.